welcome to another edition of Youth United. We're working for a better future. We interview important and influential guests that discuss their work to improve the lives of the youth. I'm your host, Maya Palazzo Martinez, and today our guest is Pedro Perez, the Executive Director of the Albany branch of the YMCA. He's here today to talk about the youth and disaster preparedness and his work with low-income youth and an innovative program called the Black and Latino Achievers Program. Here is some background on his outstanding career. Prior to his joining of the YMCA, Pedro Perez was the Deputy Superintendent of the New York State Police. A graduate from the prestigious FBI National Academy in Virginia, Perez served in many roles with the New York State Police from 1982 through 2010. In 2008, he became the first Hispanic 90-year history of the New York State Police to be designated the first Deputy Superintendent of the New York State Police. So welcome, Mr. Perez. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with question number one, and giving the audience a little bit of background on yourself and your career with the police and with the Y.
Well, I spent nearly 30 years with the New York State Police, starting first as a trooper, handling case assignments and traffic enforcement, as well as all kinds of investigations as a young trooper. Rose through the ranks to be a supervisor, worked undercover as an investigator, handled homicide investigations, worked in the Bureau of Criminal Investigation as a commissioned officer. Each of the commissioned officer ranks that I attained, I happened to end up being the first Latino to serve in those ranks, so from lieutenant all the way to the military rank designation of Brigadier General, I was the first Latino to serve in those positions, ultimately ending my career as the second in command of the state police with the title of First Deputy Superintendent.
And did you know as a youth that you wanted a career in law enforcement?
Actually, I did not. I had other aspirations. I was involved in theater and music. I'm still a musician, and wanted to be a teacher. Ultimately, I applied for federal teaching jobs. The way things turned out during the Reagan administration, those opportunities dried up, so I began taking civil service exams, and the state police ended up calling me, and it turned out to be a very fortunate turn of events for me. It was a great career. I had a great deal of fun and lots of adventure. It's a fabulous organization. It has grown tremendously over the last 30 years to become a very diverse agency. It had not been when I first joined, but it is now.
I understand. And so why did you choose the state police, and what kind of advice would you give to anyone else who would want to be in that same career path?
Well, the advice that I would give any young person with respect to any career, particularly with the state police, but any career, is to work very early to make sure that you have focus on your character, focus on having a tremendous education, a broad-based education. English literacy and other language literacies are important, particularly in this hemisphere right now. Obviously, learning Spanish would be a very intelligent thing to do, given the fact that the Latino population is growing tremendously and currently is the largest minority group. And by 2040, the minority population of the United States will be the majority, and of that new majority, Latinos will be the majority of that group. So I think language literacy, math literacy, and focusing on a general liberal arts education long before you go into specializing in the area that you have an interest in. Bottom line is you have to love what you're doing, and then it's not working.
I understand. That's a great advice for anyone. And so you do have a long career in working in public safety on top of everything else you do. So major natural disasters impacting communities have required the state police and other first responders to do more than just law enforcement. So what has been the role of the state police in responding to natural disasters?
Well, clearly, as you said, the state police is a first responder. Moreover, we administer a state's levels response as the state's law enforcement agency. Within the state police headquarters in Albany, there is the SEMO Center, the State Emergency Management Center. We help oversee that center along with SEMO, that's the State Emergency Management Organization. At every single area of the state, there are troopers working with their counterparts at the state, local, and county levels to ensure that there's a coordinated response. When you have a major disaster, because of our statewide jurisdiction, the state police is able to mobilize hundreds of troopers to respond to that area very quickly to provide emergency services, evacuation services, and to help maintain law and order, of course, because there are times when that is necessary. But the primary role is to help rescue and save people. There are many troopers that have risked their lives and some who have died responding to disasters and helping people to get away from those terrible events.
I take a very big responsibility in that because I know, some people are unfortunate in these events. So a 2012 survey from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, otherwise known as FEMA, they found out that 60% of Americans don't have a family emergency plan in case of a natural disaster or any other emergency. So how dangerous is it to have so many people, so many families unprepared for these disasters, and what kind of stress does that put on the first responders?
But one need only look at Katrina's response and the tragedy of Katrina in Louisiana and in New Orleans and look at the ice storms that have occurred across this state and other states, and most recently look at Atlanta. When you're not prepared for a disaster, it puts your family at risk, it puts your loved ones at risk, it puts first responders at risk because they're risking their lives to come and rescue at times. If you don't heed the warnings that are issued by CMO or at the New York State level, or FEMA at the federal level, or any other emergency responding organization, you put people's lives at risk, people that you love's lives at risk, and then you put those individuals that are coming to respond to help you at risk. The financial impact of not being prepared to yourself individually and to the surrounding community and to of course this country becomes extremely high. And therefore, those monies that could be spent on youth education and things of that nature end up being spent on responding and ameliorating the injuries and the damage that has occurred to public property and private property.
So you would definitely enforce that people should get prepared and start thinking ahead of time?
I believe that it's absolutely necessary that an individual prepare themselves, that they get educated on preparedness, that they work with state, local, and federal agencies to understand what the needs are for particular disasters, and that they listen very, very closely, and that they collaborate with each other, local communities and local individuals and neighborhoods. If they work together, they can help each other make the disaster less damaging to themselves and to their community.
I understand. And so it appears that the public places, they put too much trust in these first responders, thinking, well, we don't have to do anything because they're going to be there. So is it realistic to think that, everyone can be helped by these first responders?
Well, it's not realistic. The placing of trust, I think, is essential. They have to trust the first responders. The first responders are their neighbors, and sometimes they're part of their family. Obviously, first responders are not strangers in these communities. They are part of the community. So placing trust is important. However, relying solely on them, I think, is not the most intelligent thing to do. I think self-reliance is probably the most important thing in collaboration with these first responders and with their neighborhood and their neighbors. And I would encourage everyone to develop a disaster plan for themselves in coordination with these other entities that I've mentioned.
I understand. And so taking kind of like a turn on this, think of the low-income families that don't really have a lot of advantages in having their own supplies. The FEMA survey showed that most of them were totally unprepared for a natural or man-made disaster, and that's because there are limited resources, limited funds, limited amount of money. So how seriously should low-income families take this trend of growing natural disasters, and how do they start, with their struggle?
Well, first of all, disparity that exists in this country between those that have and those that do not have exist at every single level. And so particularly when you're looking at that disaster preparedness, it costs money to gather equipment. It costs money to have a shelter. It costs money to get emergency supplies and store them. So it is one of the continuing tragedies that we have in a country that is this rich, where we have individuals that do not have the capabilities of supplying themselves, educating themselves on disaster preparedness. So I would advise them to, again, the notion is collaborating with their neighbors so that they can in fact do that. And education is key. If they educate themselves, there are lots of resources, lots of entities that would want to help, but unless they educate themselves on it, they may not be able to avail themselves of that help that exists.
I understand, and a lot of these low-income families do have a lot of children, so bringing youth into the question, youth can be a great resource in helping families prepare for the natural disaster because they have practice in schools with drills and, social media and just lectures about it. So what do you think we need to do to engage, the young population in becoming leaders in their homes to make sure that there is emergency planning throughout the whole family?
Well, as I mentioned, there are resources out there, so I would encourage young people to take the lead because they have the training and the knowledge to enter cyberspace and to be able to gather that material. That they work with their teachers and their principals in their schools to ask them about what are the resources that exist in their community, that they bring that information home to their parents, that they act as intermediaries and liaisons between the school and the parents and other entities that are out there that are going to come in and assist during a disaster. Young people these days, I think, have tremendous responsibilities on their shoulders and handle those responsibilities very well. Young people today, I think, are extremely educated and are very intelligent and can be the lead in a family emergency if they simply utilize all the knowledge that they can gather. And when it comes time to respond, that they have all of that material ready so that they can give their families the help that they need. Now, the question comes down to immigrant families and families that may not have English as the first language. That's where young people, again, can be very, very helpful because they can act also as translators.
I understand. And so we're going to be taking a quick break right now from the program, and we'll be right back with Mr. Perez after these important messages.
I already knew that I was going to go to college, from a young age. I definitely want to major in political science. After that, I'm going to get my law degree. Then I'm going to come back to Detroit, boost the economy, become the mayor or something, try to make the situation better for other people. I feel like I owe it to the city. I'm determined. It's going to happen. My name is Justin, and I am your dividend.
We are back, and thank you for staying tuned for Youth United. Our guest today is Pedro Perez, the Executive Director of the Albany YMCA and a former top official with the New York State Police. So we're back to our program. We'll talk back about the FEMA survey as we were talking about before. Households with school children who brought home more preparedness materials and more knowledge about getting ready, they significantly showed the report to plan more with their families, and they were 75% more likely to have a household plan. So do you think that schools need to do more to make sure these students have the knowledge and have the ability so they can start setting up these family plans for emergencies?
Yes, not only do the schools need to do more, but I think any agency that touches that child that is going to, whether it's a social services agency, or whether it's law enforcement, fire departments, emergency management organizations, including not-for-profits, should be engaging young people and helping them to understand what are the needs during an emergency, what are the steps that they can take to protect themselves and their family, how to organize the family so that the family will be able to respond and leave a disaster area and go to a safe haven. They can help in identifying where those safe havens are. So I really do think that all of these entities ought to be providing that education to young people, ought to be providing opportunities for internships and mentorships so that they can really end up getting the necessary information, particularly for poor families and families, again, that may not have English as their primary and first language.
I understand. And again, the FEMA survey also brought up that households with incomes of $60,000 or less, they were more likely than those with a lesser income to have somewhat disastrous supplies in their cars or at home, or have taken even preparedness courses. So what can be done to help low-income families and, the youth and the elderly better prepare for a natural man-made disaster? I mean, take a look at these kits here from the Red Cross. They are very expensive. Some of them even range from $20 to couple hundred. So how do the family of four, for example, a struggling family of four, how would they be able to afford these?
Well, that is a difficult question to answer because obviously from the point of view of the family, having a roof over their heads and having food on the table is very important. So they have very limited resources. I think, again, the entities that I mentioned earlier could participate in helping to provide these resources at no cost, or at least a reduced cost. State, federal, and local government can assist in providing those. The children can provide as an in-kind service, helping with street cleanup and things of that nature. And then instead of being paid necessarily with dollars in the first instance, sometimes it can be paid with these kinds of resources. There are lots of ways to solve this problem of disparity, and I think this country is intelligent enough and creative enough and resource rich enough to be able to share its resources with low-income families and the elderly.
I see. And before we kind of move on from this topic, what advice can you give for the young people especially to help them take leadership in having their families be prepared?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, they need to educate themselves. They need to identify who are the entities that are going to be responding. They can create in their computers a list of phone numbers, emergency phone numbers, a list of names of the agencies and the individuals in charge of the agencies, who are the local liaisons. They can create a package for their families so that when a disaster hits, the family can immediately respond. They can keep it on their iPhones or their Galaxies or all of the media that they have to be able to utilize that. But they also need to keep hard copies because, of course, during a disaster, power may go out, batteries may die. So they need to keep hard copies. We still can't completely divorce ourselves from paper.
No, absolutely not. All right, now moving on, I know you've done a lot of work with youth and character development, and since you are, the executive director at the YMCA, can you tell us more about the goals and the mission of the Black and Latino Achievers Program?
The Black and Latino Achievers Program is a program that is designed to help young people identify and achieve their educational and career goals. We're currently involved with nearly 200 young people this year. We started our program in September, and the Black and Latino Achievers Program is open to all children. They don't have to be Black or Latino. Its focus is on Black and Latino youth, but all children can participate in it. Teenagers primarily in high school, although we've started a Junior Achievers Program just recently for our middle school program. We have started what is educational clusters and career clusters, and what those are essentially are where professionals, corporations, and other entities come in and help provide educational format and lessons to the young people so that they can decide what is the career that they want. And as I said earlier, you really ought to chase your passion. Once you chase your passion, educate yourself on your passion, then work is not working. Work ends up being a joy. This is one of the things that we want to educate them on. We tried to provide them with understanding of how to prepare FAFSA reports for financial aid, with their college essays. We talked to them about what is the right way to do a career interview, what are the right clothing to wear, all of the things that are necessary for them to succeed both in their college and in career. We take them on a tour of Wall Street and other businesses across the region. We also do college tours. So the entire Black and Latino Achievers Program is designed to provide these young people with all of the knowledge they need to succeed in their college and careers.
From the big scale things to the little details, everything's important in between. So that's a great program for young people, and I believe you would encourage everyone to take interest in it.
Absolutely. I frankly would encourage you to participate in it. I understand you are a member of the Bethlehem Y. The Bethlehem Y does have a very active Achievers program, and the executive director there, Derek Martin, will be more than glad to speak to you and your father to come down and participate in the program.
It's a great opportunity, and I would definitely look into it, and I would definitely encourage my friends and classmates and everyone in between.
Thank you.
So is there more need, do you think, for programs and activities such as the Black and Latino program to help young people find their way in our complicated society, and especially the kids who have many skills and are very indecisive on what to do with their lives?
Yes, I think that there have to be even more programs. Our limitation with respect to the Black and Latino Achievers Program is that we provide this program at no cost to the families. The problem is, of course, that it does cost us to deliver the program, and so we raise scholarship funds. In fact, we're in our annual campaign as we speak. And so any other agency that wants to do this will have to understand that. It is particularly important in urban settings. When you look at the graduation rate versus the dropout rate, particularly among minority children, it is unacceptably high, the dropout rate, and the graduation rate is unacceptably low. And it's these kinds of programs that are most helpful in getting and changing that perspective. Now, frankly, by the time they're in high school, it is much more difficult to turn that equation around. We involve ourselves with early education to make sure that we change that, and I think more programs have to do that. So I would encourage any non-for-profit that can afford to do so should do so at no cost to the families so that these young people can gain the kind of skill sets and knowledge that they need so that they can be successful in the future. And then those young people, when they become successful, have to give back to their communities.
I understand. And I also take it that most of the youth in the program are from low-income families.
Many are, not all are, but many are. Our goal is to assist, that's our primary focus. But as I said earlier, any child from any background can participate in the Achievers program. It is a program for all children. We do have a focus on Black and Latinos, and we do have a focus on those individuals that do not have all the resources necessary, because they need the leg up.
I understand. And so what resources does the YMCA need to reach, more youth and enforce them to get involved in these programs?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're in our annual campaign season, so we're raising scholarship funds. Every dollar we raise goes directly to the child. None of it goes to keeping the lights on. None of the money goes to paying anybody's salary. Every dollar raised goes to helping children. In addition to that, we need professionals to volunteer. We need corporations to open their doors so that we can do tours and have internships in their programs. We need colleges to make their colleges accessible for not just for tours, but also for these children to be able to enter those colleges. The best colleges in the country ought to really look very carefully at their admission standards, not lowering the standards, but making sure that the standards are equitable and that there's parity with respect to the standards across their entire population, so that their colleges can become more diverse, because as this country becomes more diverse, we need to educate a much more diverse population of young people so that they can lead this country and America can stay strong.
I understand. And a lot of youth people, like you said, they have these great skills and abilities to lead our country forward, but they don't have the resources to develop them. So in your view, what would be the utopia of these youth programs, and what would the perfect program look like, and how would it help shape a young individual into a successful, compelling adult?
For me, the perfect program would be a collaborative program that is youth-centered, youth-driven, resource-rich. No child would be turned away because of lack of resources. That the best colleges and the best professionals and the best corporations would be at the door, providing their resources. That the U.S. government and every stage and every level of our government would be participating in ensuring that all of our children, particularly those children who have less, would get additional aid so that they can become as successful as possible, so that the promise of our Constitution becomes fulfilled, that the promise and the dream of Martin Luther King becomes fulfilled. That is the utopian youth program that I would love to see.
And that's the kind of programs that everyone needs. I think everyone would agree on that. And so is there a website or a number to call for the youth interested in being, part of this program? You could look directly to the audience and tell them.
Yeah, the number for the Albany YMCA is 518-463-9622. And the website is www.cdymca.org. That's www.cdymca.org.
That's great, and I hope that everyone who's watching would take a look into that, and especially if anyone is interested, definitely go and support this program. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have left today. So thanks to you again, Pedro Perez, for being here and taking your time for being on our show. That has been a very interesting discussion. And please join us for our next edition of Youth United, where we will have interesting and important guests to come and discuss about youth. I'm Maya Palacio Martinez, your host, and until next time, stay well.